It's the age-old question. Should you buy a high mileage, cheap performance car, or should you spend a little bit more money and have something with lower miles? We did just that to find out the answer with our high mileage, cheap E92 M3, and it's time to find out what the answer is. Viewers of the channel will recognize this car. We have done a whole project series on it, from buying it, doing all the maintenance, and then doing everything to try and make it drive as well as we can. This car cost us £16,000 and we've spent £8,000 on the car in maintenance. So this car is now cost us £24,000. It has 152,000 miles on it. A similar Monte Carlo edition car with half the miles, at around 70,000 miles, is now £24,000. So with the amount we spent on this, we could have bought a 70,000 mile example of exactly the same car. Now, have we succeeded in making this drive as well as something with less miles, or is it even better than that? Well, to answer that question, I have our Japan red E92 M3 over here, which has 70,000 miles. It does have some modifications, but I'm going to try and ignore those for the purposes of this test. The only way I can really answer that question is out on the road. So let's take this for a drive, then that for a drive, and then we can discuss the results. I'm on the road in the Japan red E92 M3, so I could just do a recap of the modifications on this car while I'm getting to the main part of the road. So it currently has the full E-Venturi plenum intake, airbox lid and duct setup, Evolve stage 2, which is primary cat delete, ECU tune and the GTS DCT software. Just take a moment to appreciate that wonderful noise. This car also does have our new Bilstein MSS suspension on it, but I'm going to discount the way the car's riding for the purposes of this test, because this car has 72,000 miles on it. It's a good one, so this would probably cost you around maybe late 20s, £30,000 to buy with this kind of mileage and service history. And the bushes are completely original on it. It doesn't have any suspension refresh at the moment. This drive is just to get a baseline. It's a bit slippery out here today. So I can compare it against the higher mileage car, which has now had a full suspension refresh in terms of the suspension arms, the bushes, the subframe. Every time I have a long gap away from driving an E92 M3 and I jump back in it, just reminds me of how good they are. The sound from the engine, the way it revs, and it's a really decent size for UK B roads. That sound on the downshift is so addictive. In fact, the noises this car makes is addictive, full stop. And then it drives really well as a bonus, but it's very greasy. I've got the car in MDM, just can see it flicking away there. This drives as I would expect a 70,000 mile car to drive. This is a fairly good one, so I think it's had a fairly easy life compared to some of the cars I've driven. I'm going to head back to the workshop now so I can jump in the high mileage car with the suspension refresh and see how different it is. I'm very curious. I don't actually know. I have driven both the cars, but not back to back, so it's very difficult to tell the difference in those circumstances. But with the blue car, I have noticed a massive change every time we've changed everything, but that was the purpose of that build. It was to find the answer to whether you buy a high mileage one and spend money on it, Is it as good as this? Is it better? Let's find out. As you could probably tell, I was having a lot of fun in the Japan Red E92 M3. The plenum and the intake plays a big part in that because the sound is just epic. So this has a lot to live up to, but immediately I can tell with the steering it's much more direct. And in the red car I wouldn't have said there's play in the steering wheel, but now because this has had everything refreshed underneath, I can tell you that the red car does have a little bit of play in the steering wheel. And even going through this S-bend here, the car just feels a hell of a lot tighter. There is absolutely no movement in the subframe compared to the red car. The red car, if you asked me before, I would have said it's absolutely fine, but until you drive one that's had everything refreshed, you can't tell. Obviously I'm going to discount the ride because this has the dampers that were on the red car, so they're around 70,000 miles, so as you can probably see from the video, the ride is quite a bit choppier. But in terms of how tight the car feels and the steering precision, it's very different. And I had a massive gap between driving this and driving the red one again, and I was very happy with every incremental stage we were doing on this car, and I could notice a difference, but I didn't realize there would be this much difference between this car and the red one. But if you think about it, 70,000 miles is a lot of miles to have the suspension components and especially the rubber and the bushings perish, not just with mileage but over time. The car is a 2012 car, so it's a decade old even though it doesn't seem like it. So that is a very pleasant surprise. I was expecting a difference, but not as large as it has made in this. This car is completely stock in terms of its power, so it doesn't have the snappiness of the Stage 2, and because it's got the stock gearbox software, it's a little bit lazy. It just goes to show you how nice the GTS DCT feels. But yeah, it feels a lot tighter. There's a lot less movement on the road over undulations, where you can just feel in the red car just little movements before the suspension does what it needs to do. Whew, that was very interesting. So I'm going to head back over to the workshop and we can have a little summary about the drive in both cars and whether I think it's worth buying the higher mileage car and spending money on it. Now I've driven both the cars, it's time for a verdict. Should you buy a cheap, high mileage performance car like we have and spend all that money on maintenance, or do you buy a lower mileage car with the same money? Now this car does have 152,000 miles, and in terms of power, which I've not talked about during these videos, it was healthy. We did the rod bearings, which are a necessary preventative maintenance, and the car made the power I would expect a stock car to make. So in terms of that, it was fine. What we were trying to get to the bottom of was making this feel like an E92 M3 should do. And by taking a £16,000 car with 152,000 miles on it, spending £8,000 on it, now you could spend a bit less, you could save a bit less money if you're doing the work yourself, but realistically you're not going to save a huge amount. Now this car is giving me an E92 M3 experience with the extra £8,000 spent on it. But that takes us to £24,000. We've found a very similar spec car that is £24,000 with half the mileage, so it's around 70,000 miles, which is coincidentally the same as this one. Now, if you've only got £16,000, you can buy an E92 M3, but I don't think you'll get the full E92 M3 experience because the cars are getting on now and they do need the preventive maintenance done on the car, and especially the suspension refresh, because that really changes the way the car feels and makes it feel like it should do. Now, that being said, would I take the suspension refresh we did on this car and put it on this car? Would it make a positive difference enough for me to spend the money? The answer is yes, I would. Because the difference between this and this car now in terms of what the suspension refresh has done, I think this would make a positive impact on this car, even though it's got half the mileage. Now, the decision that a person has to make is, do they spend £16,000 and then invest £8,000 into a high mileage car, or do they buy the £24,000 car with a lower mileage? The issue I have with this is it comes down to finances. If you invest that much money in this car, we're never going to recover that £24,000. It's just not going to happen. I don't think I could sell this car for more than 18 grand if I was lucky. On the other hand, this one would retain its value pretty well, and if you had the funds, you could then do the suspension refresh to this. So it really comes down to your own personal circumstances and finances and the way you see the car. So what have we learned from all this? I think I've always known this, but the idea is to always spend as much money as you can on the better car rather than buying something that's cheaper and using that as a project, unless you're able to wrench on the car yourself, which makes a big difference. This exercise also taught me that this car, even though it's got 70,000 miles, the suspension components do need refreshing. And when I say need refreshing to be optimum and to make the best E92 M3 there is. At the end of the day, it's still a very good drive, and until we did the suspension refresh on this one, I didn't actually think there was anything wrong with this, but unless you've driven the cars new, which we did back in the day, obviously you forget over time what they feel like, and this has been a very refreshing journey for me. I want to thank all of you that have followed this project right from the beginning. It has now come to an end, and we do have something very special planned for this car, so please stay tuned to the channel and you'll find out what that is very soon. Thank you so much for watching, guys. If you liked the video, please remember to smash that like button, and if you haven't already, please subscribe to our channel. If you want to join the conversation, please drop a comment below and we'll try our best to respond to you. If you want to watch more of this project, you can do so over here. If you want to watch what YouTube thinks you might like from our other content, you can do so over here.